They made another Venom movie. Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. The Eye of the Storm podcast. Before we get into the main discussion, Venom 3, we're going to give you what we always give you each week, movie recommendations. So, what's the best recent thing that you have seen?
I'm going to get in and get out just because I don't think I've got anything super to recommend or watched. I watched Love is Blind, which is reality TV crap that, people may not be super interested in if you're not into reality TV, and we don't normally discuss that over here. I did try to watch The Wild Robot, but couldn't quite get to it. I might give it another attempt. But yeah, I don't have anything solid this week. So we're going to skip over me and we're going to go straight to Daniel.
So I didn't get to see much because I moved apartments and because there's a new Brotato expansion out that I've been playing. But one thing I did watch this week was The Italian Job, which is there's two movies by that name, and I'm talking about the 2003 remake, where it kind of starts out as a pretty standard heist movie where a group of people get together and they make a plan how to steal a bunch of gold in Venice, and they pull off that plan, and as they drive away into the sunset, one of them betrays them and steals all their gold, essentially. And the rest of the team then spends the next year coming up with a plan on how to get back at him and steal the gold back. And then the actual movie starts, which is a heist movie in which a group of thieves have to steal from another thief who not only knows them, but also knows all of their tricks and tactics and schemes. And one of the people joining them is the daughter of the leader of the crew, who, like her father, is a safecracker, but is not a thief, but works for the police cracking safes. And so she joins these people who she despises because they are the reason her father essentially spent her entire childhood in prison, and she kind of has to work with them to get back at the person who killed her father. And so it's like the story about revenge and about these different people kind of doing things for their own reasons. And it's also a fairly classic heist movie in which they plan a job and they execute it and everybody contributes like a specialty, and then something goes wrong and they have to adapt and so on, right? But the twist is that they're stealing from a thief who knows their tricks. So it's just a really solid movie. If you like heist movies, it's a really solid one. Like, the characters are likable and the twist makes it a little bit more interesting. So just a solid recommendation.
I have seen that actually previously, a very long time ago. I do remember it being good, but I've not watched it in like many years. But that's really, really good movie.
I actually watched a Tyler Perry series called Beauty in Black. Funny, I think Tyler Perry's got some sort of Netflix skill, because I think he's released 2 or 3 movies and TV shows this year. So this series, the stereotypes were in the series, like the black stereotypes were featured in the series, and it was quite vulgar at times, but overall, oh my god, it was about. So literally a stripper she ends up crossing paths with a powerful family that's involved in cosmetics and human trafficking as well, and then that kind of leads her down a crazy dark path pretty much. But yeah, overall it was actually, I found it very engaging. I think there were times where it was kind of like corny, especially with like the background music that was used in certain scenes. It kind of felt like a Tubi type of film. I don't know if anyone's seen Tubi movies, but yeah, it did kind of feel like that. But at the same time, I think with Tyler Perry, he's very, for me anyway, it's like he knows how to kind of like keep you engaged when it comes to the storyline. It's messy and it's just entertaining. It's definitely a fun watch. I ended up binging it in one day, so it's a popcorn type of series. That being said, it looks like we have arrived at the main event.
So Venom: The Last Dance is the third and allegedly final Venom movie. It's essentially about Eddie Brock and Venom trying to travel to New York City to clear their name. Apparently they're being framed for a murder. And then an alien symbiote hunter arrives and starts hunting them, so they have to run away from them. And then there's a plot about symbiotes being studied beneath Area 51 that's being decommissioned. And then the whole thing kind of culminates in this conflict between the symbiotes, the military, and the symbiote hunters. I'm struggling to summarize this because it's such a messy and bloated plot that it's kind of hard to talk about. I don't even really know where to start and where to finish and what's important and what isn't. and I'm not sure the filmmakers did either. So what were our takeaways from Venom: The Last Dance?
Boy, it's actually funny that you say he was running to New York to try and clear his name. I just saw it as he's trying to get to New York so he can be in the next Spider-Man movie, pretty much.
He started out in the MCU, right? Because
exactly.
I don't remember exactly where this happened, but in some after credits scene, he gets teleported into the MCU so that he can cross over with Spider-Man. And they fixed that in the first 2 minutes, where he just says, "Oh, I'm getting too old for this multiverse nonsense." And then a portal opens and pulls him back into his original universe, and then the movie starts.
Yeah. That was hilarious. I was like, someone 100% told them to fix whatever like they had going on there and put him back in his universe.
Apparently, Disney is playing hard to get when it comes to making the crossover with Spider-Man happen, and so they said, "Okay, fine, we're gonna take our toy and go home." That's apparently what was behind this.
I mean, for good reason on Disney's part. Not that they're making some of the best movies of recent, but I mean, what Sony's been producing with these characters is extremely frustrating, especially because they've got some, really iconic comic book characters here. You got Venom, who is one of the, big Spider-Man villains. And I've never liked any of the previous movies. I've never saw the fun in, Venom 1 or Venom 2. I just kind of go there because I'm obligated. I'm kind of obligated to go to some of these comic book movies. But this one was even worse than the first two in the sense that there wasn't really much going on. The plot was just kind of like all over the place. There wasn't a real sort of antagonist, and like the thing that I kind of went into this for was now the symbiote god, who was finally being introduced into some of this particular series, and he was meant to be like the big bad of all symbiotes, and he's barely in this movie, and they replaced him with these symbiote hunters that are just generic alien monsters from any other any other movies that you can potentially get. And it doesn't help that they don't speak or they don't say anything, so you don't really have a real antagonist in this. So then you're kind of left with Venom and Eddie Brock as kind of like your main pull for this movie. And while their interactions are fine for the most part, I don't feel like it's good enough to carry the movie enough. And then you just have like really annoying side characters. So you have like the military guy who is just kind of like there, and it's just like the angry military guy who just wants to do the opposite, or wants to just kind of like burn everything because he feels like he's right and just won't listen to anyone or whatever. And then you have like these scientists that they introduce, and then one in particular where they gave her this like whole backstory between like her and her brother, and it's just a bit like, one, who cares, and two, it doesn't really like feed into the story. It doesn't really like lead anywhere. It doesn't do anything impressive in the story. So it's just a bit like, okay, what the hell was the point apart from you potentially setting up a new character that you might do more Venom type movies on, which is my only like thinking behind it, because she adds absolutely nothing really of significance to the story, or her backstory doesn't really contribute anything of interest in that sense. I'm at loss of words. I'm like even trying to remember the movie, because like, what's really telling is that, normally when I go to the cinema with a group of people, we'll come out of the movie and we'll talk about what we just watched, and we'll talk about like, things we liked and theories and this and the other. And with this movie, we literally came out of the cinema and talked about everything but this movie, because it was so forgettable and it was so just bad and just unenjoyable. Even when it got to a point where it could do some cool things in the third act, where they had many different symbiotes in there, it just wasn't entertaining, and it wasn't fun, and there wasn't any threat level or risk factor or anything like that, or like any sense of like kind of not there wasn't any kind of sense of like stakes or anything like that, because they're being chased by this symbiote hunter, which seems impossible to kill, because anytime you think you kill them, they just regenerate and come back to life. So it was just a bit like, it seems like they were kind of like bankrupt on ideas for this movie, or they didn't really know what they wanted to do with Null, or they maybe wanted to save Null for a different movie and just wanted to do some type of small introduction here. So it's just overall just one big waste of a movie and one big waste of time. So that's my thoughts on it.
I feel like this like kind of discussing this movie is going to be kind of hard for me, because I feel like the Venom franchise has been not really memorable for me. I do remember that I kind of enjoyed, like I did enjoy Venom 1. I completely can't even like To be fair, I can't even remember like what the hell happens in Venom 1 or Venom 2. I just remember like the feeling that I felt when watching them. I just can't. I just feel like this franchise in general for me is just not really memorable because it's the first time I'm looking back at a movie that I've seen and I can't remember jack. And I think with the third one, I wasn't surprised with what I got, if you want me to be honest. When I watched the trailer, there wasn't really anything that did anything for me. It's a Sony trailer, so I just wasn't really getting that much. So when I watched the movie, I said, the film should have been what the last 25 minutes were. I think the last 25 minutes was borderline great for me, whereas everything before that, not so much. I'll be honest with you, it low-key felt like watching a travelogue between Eddie and Venom. There wasn't really like a story there, as in like the story was that they're traveling pretty much to, I even forgot where the hell they were going, but they were going somewhere, and I felt like that just like Act 1 and Act 2, it was just there wasn't nothing there for me, man. It wasn't bad, but it was just Sony.
So my experience with the Venom franchise is essentially, I really hated the first half of the first movie. Just couldn't stand Eddie Brock there, and there was a whole bunch of very cliche writing. And then the second half, they did some fun stuff. And the second one was messy, but at times a wild ride. And this one is just a ride, right? Like it's completely overstuffed with things that don't really fit together. I think the plot is simultaneously very convoluted and too simple, and it's also a conclusion to a trilogy, but it doesn't really conclude very much. There's not really a journey that spans across the 3 movies that this brings to conclusion. It's also structured like a road movie, but it doesn't work like one, or it doesn't do what good road movies do. So yeah, the whole thing is just obligatory and joyless. And I didn't like, aside from a handful of fun scenes, there was just nothing creative in this, and it's just 2 hours of Tom Hardy collecting a paycheck, essentially. Like, there's nothing else going on in this movie. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I think my biggest disappointment was that there was no Null in this, because I knew what to expect going into the Venom movie in terms of like it not being anything spectacular story wise or character wise. And even like sort of like action set piece wise, I've never really kind of like cared for what's going on in there. So like I'm normally a person that really enjoys antagonists in sort of movies and sort of kind of like the threat that they possess. And when you position sort of Null to be on the same level of like a Thanos, and sort of he's meant to be someone that's like a big bad in sort of the Marvel universe, like that's what I was like sold, and that's what I was like kind of going in there expecting to kind of see him sort of just like be like establish himself as one of the like big threats in sort of like in any sort of like kind of like movie and whatever, and the fact that we got barely anything of him in this, and he was kind of like stuck in the prison that he was in, was extremely disappointing in that sense. Maybe it was my expectations. Again, I didn't really pay attention too much to some of the trailers or some of what was going on, but it seemed like that's what this whole movie was kind of like going to be about, and the fact that we didn't get much of that was just really frustrating.
Yeah. I don't know that character whatsoever from the comics, but I think I may have read one Venom comic at some point, so I just don't know these characters. But like, as presented in the movie, there's just nothing to him, right? He's a cliche-looking guy who kind of looks into the camera in a brooding way, and then he sends CGI monsters after the hero, kind of to get a MacGuffin. And even like they introduce him in this really terrible voiceover that just dumps all the exposition. It's like this is supposed to be like the big motivator, and they kind of set in an after credit scene, they set him up as like the next big villain kind of thing, which is a bit weird because this is apparently the last Venom movie. So whose villain is he going to be? Like it's just so rote and so tired.
It was just Sony movies. Like, from what I've seen from Sony so far, with Madam Web, and obviously I didn't really feel like it was that bad as. Well, to be fair, I wasn't disappointed, but it wasn't as bad as people make it seem. It wasn't Madam Web, but I think. But what they all do have in common is like it feels like it's just scenes being like they've created scenes and put together scenes, but there's not an actual story that's, you know, do you know what I'm saying? It's like it's missing that story that's engaging. Even though when you put scenes together, yeah, it's technically a story, but obviously that's the cohesiveness in it. And it just, I don't know how to kind of like explain how I'm like, I don't know how to articulate what I'm trying to say, but it just felt like it was scenes rather than the actual story itself. And Sony, they've done this. I'm not trying to kind of slate Sony and trying to say that, oh, I'm not trying to pretty much bash them, but it's like this has been the third time that I've watched a Sony movie, and I'm like, bro, like the way you guys are presenting your stories just doesn't feel like a flipping story, bro. I don't know. I feel like they might have to give back their rights to Marvel for certain of these characters because it's just getting a bit. Even though I don't even know if Marvel's gonna do a better job, but still.
I compared it to a road movie earlier, right? And those are also kind of one thing happening after the other, but that's because there are different steps on the way to a destination, and in the course of going through their journey, the characters learn things about themselves where they realize that what they thought was their destination is not actually a destination, and they end up as different people than when they began. So like there's a structure to road movies, right? And you could have made a movie about Venom and Eddie Brock traveling to New York or wherever, make it Las Vegas, doesn't matter what. And like the destination doesn't really matter, and the individual episodes don't really matter, but they add up to a discovery about themselves in some way, right? You can do that if you want. And they kind of structured the movie this way for like a large chunk of it. But then what's the point? Like what exactly are they working towards? What is the realization? What is the character moment? You know what I mean? Like there's just a general lack of a point in terms of where the story goes and what it's for, and where Venom and Eddie end up in the end compared to where they started. There's just nothing there.
I think the only like tie back that I can like even give this to a previous movie was like the family aspect of it, because like he had his like ex-wife who I think like moved on or like married someone else if I remember correctly, and it's like part of it was like him, you know, kind of seeing himself in like that kind of like father role, and maybe like understanding that sort of family is meant to be important, and that's maybe the life that he, you know, could have lived or something like that. But it's not executed well enough in the story. It's not sort of, you know, handled with sort of enough sort of care to sort of have you emotionally invested in sort of the journey that he's going on in this sort of story.
I would say it's not there at all. I wouldn't say that it's handled not well enough or anything like that. I would say it's not there. Honestly, like Tom Hardy is kind of stumbling through this movie, just mumbling to himself. And I don't think they even attempt to do very much.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of my whole takeaway. Like I was kind of baffled throughout the entire movie, just waiting, like, surely at some point the plot will begin, right? Mm-hmm. But then just one thing after another kept happening, and then the movie was over. Was kind of incredible.
Yeah, it got to a point where I realized that Noel wasn't coming in this movie, and I was like, this is the movie. Yeah. Like, damn. And
I thought that was clear from the beginning, because in order for him to appear, he needs the what's the nonsense name?
It's whatever like thing that Venom was carrying.
The Nexus, the Singularity, the what is it? The Codex.
The Codex.
Right?
Yeah, that's the one.
So whatever that is, right? So
yeah.
that is just defined into existence, and it has nothing to do with anything. It's not clear why Venom reviving his host creates a codex of some kind, or even if it's just a fancy word for they kind of have a permanent connection now. It's not clear why that helps the villain and why that lets him break out of his prison. It's just a MacGuffin, right? It's just made up. Like they just drew comic book tropes out of a hat. I think that's all that was going on there. But in order for him to escape his prison, then he needs a codex, right? That's the whole thing. And that is why he sends the xenophages. But in order for them to get the codex, Venom has to die, right? And Eddie has to die, right? So there's no way that's actually happening.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought they would move magic up some BS for him to kind of like break out a different way, or like for like him and Venom to somehow fake die or something like that. I don't know. I was just kind of waiting to see what the movie decided to do with that, and it eventually did nothing of interest.
That's kind of not the only time this movie did that, right? Where it kind of deflated all stakes by creating conflicts where we know from the start nothing is going to happen, right? Like, there's no way Eddie and Venom actually die to give the villain the codex, and now he can enter the world. Like, that would be a bold story choice to go, but we know that's not going to happen, right? And the second one is that the xenophages are just being defeated in a fight, right? There's no trick to them. Nobody has to make some, like, Venom ends up making a big sacrifice, but ultimately you just have to fight them, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the reason he kind of uses the acid in the end, like he drags them into the acid bath, right? Like, I didn't pick up on a reason why it had to be that. Like, surely big guns would have done it too at some point. So it's a bit like a kaiju movie where the monster is invincible until it's dead, that kind of thing. And that just deflates any kind of story tension, because nobody's making a choice. There's no scenario in which this goes any other way than the xenophages are dead in the end, right? So by hinging it on these two things, you've just removed all conflict from the story, really, all tension from the story, because there's only one way this can go. And there's no, like, the only thing that was a little bit surprising is that Venom sacrificed him at the end. But that's it. Everything else is just the laziest writing, in the sense of you're just going to conjure something up that sounds important, but in terms of what the story, where the story actually can go and the way this can actually unfold, there's basically no options. It's like a roller coaster that is exciting until you realize that you can only go one way and there's no actual danger. You know what I mean? Like, everything is on rails, everything can only go to one destination. And like, that's just writing, like bad writing 101, I thought. Like an experienced writer should realize that you need some kind of internal conflicts or something where there's actually a choice at some point that a character has to make. Like, and that can come in many different forms, but there has to be one at some point. And that just didn't happen here.
And I'll be honest with you, that's kind of like my problem that I have with, I wouldn't say a lot of superhero movies, but I think a lot of superheroes, I think what they do is a lot of the time is they make like the main villain a overlooming type of threat, rather than him actually being the actual threat of the movie and actually being part of the story, is what I'm trying to say. It's like a lot of the times it's like they will use the sub-villain as the main villain, whereas the main villain is just, like I said, an overlooming threat. And that's the issue that I have with a lot of these movies, because it makes it less, like, I remember Daniel said it would have been a bold move if Venom and Tom Hardy did die, and then obviously, how do you pronounce his name? Knoll or something like that?
No,
I don't know.
Yeah, whatever his name is, but him, yeah, that would have been a bold move, right? And I would have actually, well, I didn't want Tom Hardy or Venom to die, but a move like that would have been so interesting if, like, he was just, for me personally, if he was introduced earlier, and if his, like, you know, if he was pretty much just part of the story rather than him just being that antagonist threat that is, you know, that's just there to show the kind of like the stakes and the consequences. I think all of these movies do that, where they'll just, you know what I'm saying? And I don't really like that, especially for this movie. It was like, cool. Even like the sub-villains, though, I don't know what his monsters were, but they didn't really do nothing for me. That's why I felt like the stakes in this movie wasn't high enough, and like their journey, and you know, just for me, I didn't think the stakes were high enough, is because the actual villain that they were against, those little monster things, they just weren't really, even their design was kind of boring, and just them as a villain was like, they didn't really feel, I get it that they were strong, but it didn't really do nothing for me. And it's just annoying that they always kind of like, just, you know, like they never show us the main villain and what they can do. That's why I love the Avengers, because like when Thanos was, you know, in the film, he was like the main threat that they introduced from the get-go, and they kept on developing this story. And what actually happened in terms of like the stake that obviously the superheroes were fighting against, and didn't want to made sure that Thanos wasn't going to get to that stage, and it actually did happen. So I was like, whoa, I felt like that was a shock value. I was like, whoa, it ended the villain's way, is what I'm trying to say. Do you know what I'm saying? Whereas with these with a lot of other superhero movies, like the main villain is just the threat that looms. It gets close to his goals.
The good superhero movies have a way of structuring the story in a way that's not just about a straight up fight, right? Like in the Avengers, it's not about, are they strong enough to fight Thanos? It's like the first Avengers movie. It's, can they overcome their personal differences to become a team? And then they win, right? That's why that movie works, right? And every good superhero movie is ultimately about the hero overcoming their own problems or shortcomings or challenges or whatever it is, right? having like Peter Parker has to make a choice between his different obligations. He has to choose to become a hero, and that means not getting something else that he wants, like stuff like that, right? It's in a good superhero story, it's not just about is the hero strong enough, I think, because the answer is yes. But in this movie, it kind of just comes down to just a fight. And like, there's no reason for why 8 symbiotes and an entire army base are not strong enough to kill the xenophages. I didn't understand why that was the case. The script just said so, but then Venom was strong enough to kill them with some acid, and that's apparently like that. Like that's just not a satisfying conclusion to anything. And we kind of contradicted ourselves a little bit earlier, where we said it would be a bold choice if Venom died at the end, and he did die, right? But what's different is that it doesn't come as the result of a character arc, right? It's not like he's selfish in the beginning, and then at the end, and then the story establishes that in order to win, he must be selfless, and so he gets to a point where he's selfless, and then he wins, right? That's how you would structure that. Instead, he kind of farts around for 2 hours, and then kind of from 1 second to the next decides to be a selfless hero and make the big sacrifice. But it's not attached to it's not attached to the overall story. Like, the point of the story is not to get Venom to this point where he can make that sacrifice, which he otherwise wouldn't have. Well, if that's what you want to do, then that's how you have to structure the movie. But instead, we get like a bumbling road trip for 2 hours and then a big heroic sacrifice at the end. And because that first part is missing, for me, it felt completely flat. Like, by that point, I was checked out. I had no interest at all. I was just checking my watch when I could go home, right? It's just basic, like this whole basic storytelling question of how do you make this compelling, and how do you make the audience forget that it's a foregone conclusion that the heroes win at the end, right? And they just didn't do that.
But then you guys have an issue with the limitations that they consistently place on the main villain.
I hear what you're saying, because like quite often what people say is that like Marvel, for example, have like a villain problem, or like there's always like a villain problem in these movies. So whilst I understand what Daniel's saying about the main story is about sort of what the hero's kind of like overcoming, but quite often what's sort of missing in sort of these stories is the villain having sort of significant sort of influence, or not significant influence, but kind of like having enough about them, or enough sort of kind of like character within themselves to be truly memorable, or to sort of truly, kind of like stand out in a lot of these stories. Which is why sort of Thanos works really well in sort of the Avengers movies, because sort of he had his like motivation, he had his goals, he had something that he was like sort of dead focused on, and sort of it was quite different to just your generic, this bad guy wants to wipe out the entire planet, or like this bad guy wants to kind of like destroy some of this, that, and the other, and then the hero has to stop them, essentially. So I kind of hear it from that perspective, Jonathan, in the sense of when you have these villains that are locked away or like hidden behind something, and then something has to like sort of be there to like let them out. Essentially, it doesn't really make for an interesting or compelling villain by the end of the story. And again, as someone that does enjoy a villain in these stories, quite often, their kind of presence or the feel about them is sort of severely lacking in sort of a lot of these superhero movies. But again, I understand from the perspective of that a superhero movie isn't good because of sort of the villain. It's more sort of the story and sort of kind of like character conflicts that the hero is mainly going through.
He's also not the villain in this because he has no agency. He sends the villain, and then
that's the issue that I'm trying to say.
That's the issue.
That's my issue, because it's like for me, that's what I'm saying. I get that the story shouldn't just, what makes a good superhero story shouldn't just be the villain. I understand that, but for me, it has to be like a package deal. And for me, Avengers was a package deal because it did have the journeys of the superheroes, and it also had the journey of the main villain threat, and it just came together. Whereas with a lot of these other superhero movies, it just has the character arc, and it just has pretty much the journey of the superheroes and the main villain threat just looming rather being a part of the story. And do you know what I'm saying? And that's the issue that I have with this, is like, why does it always have to be a thing where the superheroes are trying to stop the main villain from being a part of the story rather than the main villain being a part of the story?
And I feel like, where the villain is like a looming threat can work when you don't have like iconic villains. When you've got like just like say in Ghostbusters: The Frozen Empire, which we watched this year, if anyone remembers that, because that was a great movie, where you had like this essentially he kind of like froze over the whole city essentially, but he was like a looming threat that needed to be released eventually. No one really cares about him. It's fine. The story's about like kind of the characters and stuff like that. So him being like that particular villain being a looming threat is okay. But when you have like a character like Null, who's sort of iconic, who's sort of meant to be the god of symbiotes and is sort of the accumulation, it was meant to kind of like be the eventual big threat of all these symbiotes. It's just frustrating to have a character like him where you kind of want a little bit more. You want him to have a little bit more in the story. You want him to have a little bit more, sort of like Daniel said, agency in these movies, where he's just essentially locked away, and what we get in replacement is just these sort of generic CGI monsters that can't be killed unless they're sort of trapped underneath acid. And I think that's what you're trying to kind of get at, Jonathan.
Yeah, honestly, and it was the same kind of like I thought the same thing with Justice League and like the villain's name, Darkseid or Darkseid, whatever his name is. Yeah, it was. I thought the same with that as well. It's like the reason why I can't fully get engaged in these type of superhero movies where the villain is like a proper big threat is because I know that is like there's nothing gonna come of it in terms of their story. They're just there as a stake, and it's like same with Venom. That's how I was like I clocked out. Like even but I just clocked out. I wasn't as engaged because I knew Knowles, just like his presence and his villain threat is just too high for there to even be a chance that we're gonna see a glimpse of what he like his power. Like I knew what the state pretty much what they were trying to sell, which was obviously this is Eddie and Venom's last rodeo. So that was pretty much a story where I was like, okay, cool. Now we're just leading to how they're gonna die, pretty much is what I think was the selling point. But it's like there has to be more. And I think what makes other superhero stories more and great, like you mentioned the Avengers, is because they had it was leading to the end for a lot of these characters what people were waiting for, but at the same time they had the story of the villain and they wanted to see how that was going to end up as well. So then when you mesh the two together, it makes a great story. Whereas these other ones, it just has one side. It just has like a one-sided story because people already know that the other side in terms of villain, like the villain's threat is going to come to nothing. Like they already know that he's not going to win. It's just, you know what I'm saying? It's just, he's just there.
But we also know that Null is never going to appear, right? Not only does he not appear in this movie, chances are it's that he's not appearing anywhere, right? Because all of these Sonyverse movies are not connected, and this was apparently the last Venom movie. So where is he going to appear, right? Unless they do like an Agony spin-off or something like that, which they could, but I know that it would seem like a weird choice. But like they set up this entire thing, like they're following kind of the Thanos template, right? Of we're dealing with villains, henchmen. And when the henchmen fail, the villain says, okay, fine, I'll do it myself. But it's a bit like if Thanos said it at the end of Endgame, right? We know there's not more coming. It doesn't feel like, when I saw that mid-credit sequence where Null kind of gets up from his throne and basically says, okay, fine, I'll do this myself. First of all, I didn't quite understand why you can do this without the codex. Maybe I missed something at that point. I was not the most engaged. But let's just say there's a way for him to actually do something without the codex, right? There's no way we're getting a movie where that happens, right? I don't see how.
People would say he's going to be the main villain in Spider-Man 4, so
that would be very surprising. Like that for that to happen, Disney and Sony have to make up between now and then. And isn't Spider-Man 4 already filming or in preparation? I think it's filming next year or something. I don't know. I doubt that happens. I think it's just one of those after credit scenes that sets something up that will never happen. Maybe I'm surprised in 3 years, but I don't think it's happening.
That's another issue I've been having with these movies is the post-credit scenes. Is because at the start when they were first doing it, they used to mean something. Like you saw sort of like Nick Fury sort of turn up at the end of Avengers and sort of like promise of like an eventual like Avengers team up. You had like things like Thor's hammer at the end of like Captain America or something like that. I can't remember when his post-credit scenes sort of popped up, but they used to like mean something, these post-credit scenes. And I genuinely can't remember the last time I sat through a post-credit scene and thought, okay, this was worth it, and I'm like genuinely excited to see what comes next. Even I think the last one was probably the one in Shang-Chi where you had them sort of like examining where like this beacon was coming from sort of the rings, and he's like there deliberating with sort of Bruce Banner and Captain Marvel, and you're thinking, okay, cool, like there's like something more to the mystery here. which it didn't eventually pay off to anything, or hasn't yet. But it's just really frustrating.
There's been a few too many of these, right? There's also the one about, I don't even remember which movie that was, where Blade kind of has an 80 art line about it's about time or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's Eternals. When he speaks to Jon Snow's character, I can't really call him Jon Snow because I can't remember what his character is.
Black Knight. Yeah.
Black Knight.
We're also never going to see that character. So like they're writing checks they can't cash, right? And they have been for years. And number one, they feel obligatory now. Like I didn't even like, the only reason I saw the mid-credit scene is because the people next to me refused to get up. So I was kind of stuck in the middle of my row. Yeah. And everybody started leaving after the mid-credit scene. I didn't even see the end credit scene, and I'm not terribly motivated to find out. I can read the Wikipedia summary to see what happens in it, and it doesn't sound all that interesting. So it's a gimmick that's kind of has overstayed its welcome by a decade, and like too often it's just a fake out, like something that's basically market research, like how people will react to it, and if they don't react to it, then they'll drop it, which I guess is better than them doing it anyway. But like, especially in this where the movies are in fact not connected, right? This is not a shared universe. Like Null is not showing up in the next Morbius movie, right? If there is one. These things don't hang together in that way, and there's so now there's even less of a point to them.
Unless they were going to tease some magical crossover between like Spider-Man or something like that, then we really didn't need what we got in these post-credit scenes. So it was just a bit annoying, and I had to like sit through it because again, the people that I went with are like kind of like, so they've been trained to sit and wait for it. And these days, I actually normally just read it online. I actually don't sit and wait for them anymore. I just like kind of like read what's happened online. But I kind of like sat and waited till the end of it, and I was like, this was such a waste of my time.
I think Null is a complete nothing burger. Yeah. Even if he does show up, he doesn't seem interesting. He doesn't seem to do anything any interesting thing other than having created the symbiotes. But I don't see how that makes an interesting story. I don't see how he has an interesting motivation or interesting story or anything like that. He's just villain guy.
One thing that would have been interesting if they actually decided to actually put Null in this movie, and I was thinking towards the end of the movie, was if they had some type of like team up with some of the other symbiotes and actually like came together to actually fight Null in some type of way. And this is just kind of like me just off the fly, just like kind of like thinking about what would have been cooler to see on the screen compared to sort of what we got. But when they were introducing all these sort of different symbiotes towards the end of the movie, I was like, okay, this is great. This is like some cool action. Even though a lot of them were like killed off, quite quickly, and a lot of them sort of because they were fighting these monsters that couldn't die. It was like, okay, they have like these powers, but you can't really showcase the full effect of it because they're fighting this thing that can't die. So that was a massive waste in that sense. But it just would have been interesting to kind of like see some type of like dynamic between like the symbiotes or something like that, and them come up against like some type of villain. That in my mind, that just would have been a cooler movie to see. I don't know like the minutiae of it. I don't know something like the kind of like intricacies of like the story and stuff like that. But it just would have been better than seeing what we got, and actually like seeing that could have even been like the second or like whatever movie, or like even if they wanted to like expand the Venom universe, they could have done a better job of introducing like other sort of symbiote characters in this, but they just don't do a good job of it. And again, it's just a big what if.
And that leads into my complaints about the whole military angle of it, like this whole Imperium project thing, because they essentially study and contain these symbiotes, and they have motives for doing so. But again, like it's all hollow again, right? So they kind of study these symbiotes that have collected from all over the world, right? Apparently, they like there's a whole bunch of them, and they captured them, and now they're being studied in like this underground lab that's below Area 51. But it doesn't really matter that it's below Area 51, and also doesn't matter that Area 51 is being dismantled. While at the same time, the real secret research is still going on. Like, not like all of that takes up screen time, and none of that really matters to anything, right? And then you have got the schism between the military and the scientists, where the scientists are more kind of interested in the symbiotes and want to study them, want to understand them, and want to coexist with them, whereas the military just wants to use them and views them as a threat. Like that seems like a setup for something, but it also doesn't really lead anywhere, right? And then they make this whole deal about how finding a match between a symbiote and a host is this really big thing, right? That's just years of study goes into even finding a match, and even then it's risky and whatever. And then in the end, just 8 of them just bond with the next best human, and it just works, right? And at the same time, we've got like I'm kind of going scattershot through this because this movie goes scattershot through this stuff, right? They introduce things and ideas that then don't pay off and that then stop mattering halfway into the story. We've got, what's the name of that scientist with that very metal name? Dr. Payne, right? So Dr. Payne has this tragic backstory about having lost her brother to a lightning strike. And that doesn't speak to any motivation, right? Like that's it seems like it should, but it doesn't really. And then that kind of motivates her to become a symbiote researcher because her brother wanted to work for NASA or something. But that I don't know that ties into any decisions she makes in the end. In the end, she just randomly becomes the host of a symbiote and proceeds to be badass for a couple of minutes. But it doesn't seem to kind of flow from anything we've established about her beforehand, right? So it's all a big mess, and it's all just a big plot vomit all over the screen, and it doesn't really like as I was watching it, I was trying to make sense of it and like trying to say, okay, this feels like it's building up to something, but is it really? Like, is this really going somewhere? And like, it's one thing if within a trilogy or within a series of movies they kind of bring up ideas and then drop some or whatever. That happens, right? But this happens within the same act of the same movie. And that's kind of where it stops being funny, right? Where it's just the biggest sense, like the biggest emotion this movie got out of me was frustration as I was watching this, because it just kept introducing stuff or stating stuff or like setting up something that looked like set up for something or stakes or something, and then it just wasn't, right? It just didn't add up to anything, and that's kind of easy to say, kind of when you're talking about a movie. But this movie is just that, right? Everything that happens feels like it's leading somewhere, and then it doesn't. And that's true of just about everything, but it's especially true of everything to do with the Imperium project. Like, and I've named like 4 examples, right? I don't know what to say.
What you said there about things not leading anywhere, like genuinely, I was like, once we got to the 3rd act and I saw that we was in the 3rd act, I was genuinely shocked because I was like, I was still trying to figure out where this like movie was heading and like what sort of like kind of like the story of it was. And then once they got to like the military base and like they showed all the symbiotes, I kind of like saw that obviously like the symbiote hunter was there. I was a bit like, damn, this movie it already felt bad watching the movie, but I think it was like literally that was a moment where I was like, okay, this movie is not, there's no saving this movie at all. Like, it's literally just compounded. It's like compounded in being sort of a bad movie and like having a bad story in this, and it was just, yeah.
Can we talk about the hippies?
Sure.
So they are like the most annoying characters, right? And we spend, I don't know how long, half an hour with them, 20 minutes, something like that. And I actually think that they have probably the only funny scene where they have the sing along, and Venom is really into it, and Eddie isn't. And like, there's not a lot of enjoyable scenes in this where I was actually amused, but this was one of them because Tom Hardy actually sells this discomfort and this whole thing about not being able to leave, like, and not like he can't just walk away from Venom. And like, a lot of the time, like in the earlier movies, I think this mattered more, and here it mattered not as much. And this was one scene where where this whole I'm trapped with this voice in my head and there's nothing I can do about it actually kind of mattered again. And the fact that they are looking for aliens and they want to see the aliens and they're going on a road trip to Area 51 before it gets demolished. And then they see the aliens and they're just like monsters. I don't know that means anything. First of all, they just go into Area 51, right? I've been to Nevada. Like, this whole thing is like fenced off, like in a wide radius, and if you so much as stop for a restroom break, like the SWAT team descends on you and tells you to go on your way, right? You cannot simply walk into Area 51, even if it's being dismantled, right? So that already does not make any kind of sense, right? And like they climb up this tower, fine, whatever. And then they say something like, oh, there's no aliens here. And then like 5 symbiotes break through the wall, fight a xenophage. And that's supposed to be ironic and funny. But at that point, I was already kind of checked out. But like they have this whole thing about how they want to see aliens, right? And the son is afraid of aliens and doesn't want to meet them. And while at the same time talking to an alien. And it's supposed to be kind of ironic or something. But like this is like exhibit 57B in the long line of things that the movie sets up and then doesn't pay off, right? Like, well, like, why is it significant that they are looking for aliens and then they meet them and then they're not what they thought they were? Or maybe they shouldn't have sought them out in the first place because all that is danger, right? Like the most I can kind of like if I had to like if you put a gun to my head and I have to kind of find a theme in this, like they kind of treat symbiotes as immigrants, right? So the symbiotes are strangers, right? They come to Earth and they are hated because they look different. But they haven't really harmed anybody and they really just want to live their lives, right? But the government is convinced that they are a threat and locks them up and marginalizes them, whatever. And then in the end, they kind of realize they work together against the real enemy. And I'm not sure who the real enemy is in this metaphor. And I'm not sure Sony is either. But like if like we could drive this like to its conclusion if we wanted to. And then they kind of like this. Like ultimately, they all work together by realizing that the alien is not the enemy, right? Or not all aliens are the same, or something, right? So there's something here, but I don't know that it means anything. Also, Venom wants to see the Statue of Liberty, and what's the Statue of Liberty? It's the first thing immigrants like in the early days of the U.S. saw, right? It's where Ellis Island was, right? It's like where immigrants arrive. And Venom wants to go there, and he can't for some reason. Like he can't for plot reasons, but I don't know how that fits into the metaphor. Maybe if we try and brainstorm this a little bit, we can take this somewhere. But like there seems to be like an idea here, right? And it's like another example of underneath all this nonsense, there's an idea buried here. But they don't do anything with it. They don't drive it to a point where it actually means something, where it actually connects to anything else. And actually could have done something with this, right? Like this whole, like Captain Marvel already did this better, right? Where the Skrulls were hated because they look like monsters, but actually they're just refugees, right? And that was one of the things that really worked in that movie, I thought. The MCU also didn't take it anywhere really, because that's like shortly after that everything fell apart. But as an idea, it's there, right? And there it's actually woven into the plot and whatever. And here it's there. They spent a whole bunch of time on it, right? It's not just a mention. Like one of the symbiotes says to Strickland something about how, don't you see that we're not the enemy, or something like that, or we may look like monsters, but we're not monsters, like something to that effect, right? It's like one line, and it's not just that. There's like a whole bunch of different pieces that come together into this symbiotes as immigrants metaphor. But why not simply make a move, like while you're already at it, while you're already spending $200 million or whatever it was? What can't like just make that the story?
Do you feel like, because there's like a whole bunch of ideas here, it almost feels like a lot of these different stories were kind of like cut on the editing floor, and then the final edit that we got is just like a bit of a mismatch of like loads of different ideas in this one movie that wasn't completely. I mean, this is probably being generous or being kind to the people that made this movie, because I don't actually feel like they, were really taking any of this anywhere. But could it be that some of this was just like cut on the cut room floor, and then we've just ended up with this movie that we got?
I don't know that that's what happened, but I kind of care about the final result, and if the final result is an incoherent mess, then that's how I judge it. It may be that at some point there was a better story here, but I've not heard anything that suggests that they had this great idea and Sony turned it into nonsense through meddling or so. Like people have, I've like in reviews, I've seen this compared to Madame Web, about how this is as bad as Madame Web or not as bad as Madame Web or whatever. And I don't think you can compare the two, because this is actually like Madame Web is just like cinematic roadkill. Right, like there's nothing alive at the end. Like there's nothing left. It's just pieces lying by the side of the road, right? And this is a movie. This is somebody sat down and wrote this, and I've not seen any evidence or like I've not followed like the production process of this, but I've also not heard anything about how like Sony turned this into a mess through meddling. I think they just hired some people who are not very good at their jobs and gave them $200 million to make a pile of nonsense. I think that's what it is.
Do you know what's really funny?
Like my thing is, if you're already spending like 2 years of your life and $200 million, like why not tell a story? Put in another weekend in your pool house or whatever, and just hammer out a story about how the symbiotes are really immigrants or something. At least that would be interesting. Or like think about how what's the destination of Eddie Brock's and Venom's journey, right? They started off as in one place, and now we're ending it in another place. And like even if they're pulling a Rise of Skywalker, where in the final part of the trilogy they kind of decide that now this should be about something, like you could still do that if you wanted to. Like just try.
Do you know what's even funny was that whole like montage towards the end where like Eddie's walking down the streets of New York and they're like doing flashbacks of like previous movies and stuff like that, and it was just like hilarious to me because I was like, you've probably made the worst comic book trilogy of all time. I can't think of any other worse comic book trilogy movies, and they had like this whole like montage at the end, like they'd made some type of like cinematic masterpiece, and like it was like this like beautiful connection that Eddie had with Venom that everyone loved, and this that, and the other, and like the whole time I was like rolling my eyes like this, like they are not being self-aware about the type of movies that they put out for the past like however many years.
I think they are self-aware. So a few months ago in our Batman Cape Crusader discussion, I brought up this whole idea of cinematic gaslighting, where, or it might have been Borderlands or something, but both, I think it was Borderlands, but that was the second time in 2 weeks where a movie had done this. And now we have a third time where the movie, like they make a movie, and when they're at the end, they realize, oh no, this should have been about something. Like let's fix that. And so they put in something at the end that is designed to make it feel like it's something significant, that is designed to feel like like the movie is about something. And in this case, it was like Eddie reminiscing about his time with Venom, when in fact he hated every minute of having Venom in his head. But maybe not every minute, but like they were never on the same wavelength, really, right? They were always compromising, and Venom was essentially in charge. I've seen reviews that compare to an abusive relationship. Like when Venom first came out, they talked about how this is a romantic comedy between Eddie and Venom. I actually think it's a movie about domestic violence, because Venom walks over Eddie the entire time and makes him do whatever Venom wants on his terms. And if Eddie doesn't comply, then Venom forces him physically. So, and then that story ends in like this nostalgic, sentimental montage about how much Eddie misses Venom. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect here.
It's a massive disconnect. No,
right? But like maybe I'm taking this a little too far, and I kind of am because it's funny. But ultimately, like they put this at the end of a movie that is about nothing, and that has a whole bunch of different ideas that each individually could have been a movie. It just ends in nothing, and then at the end they put this, like they put an intern in charge of, hey, make a montage to nostalgic images, and because we're not saying anything, we're just showing people's. Like we're just showing them to like sentimental music. It feels profound. It feels like it's reminiscing. It's almost like the final credits of Deadpool, right? Where the entire credits is just deleted scenes from the last 25 years of Marvel movies, not just MCU, but all Marvel movies, right? And that it's actually not manipulative. That actually works because we actually like those movies, right? And the entire movie has been a celebration of those movies. Right? So this tries to do the same thing in this final montage, but there's no, like, we're not actually sentimental for those three Venom movies, certainly not for this one. That's why I think it's manipulative, because it's trying to convince you, it's trying to leave you with a final impression of this was about something. And there's like a human emotional core, and it doesn't. It's just stuff happening, and most of it not very good.
And it doesn't help that there wasn't a through line. There wasn't like a compelling through line of Eddie and Venom's story between all three movies to sort of have this like satisfying conclusion where you can like do this sort of happy montage and like make us reminisce of like their relationship. It just wasn't that in any of the movies at all for me anyway. So like whatever they tried to do, it didn't work on me at all.
And I have another way in which this is not like Deadpool, because this movie is getting pretty much universally negative reviews from critics, but audiences like it a lot more. I haven't looked up the Rotten Tomatoes score of it, but that's the basic pattern of it. And when people say good things about this movie, they say something like, "Oh, not everything has to be a piece of art. This can just be a wild ride. This can just be a fun romp." Deadpool showed us what 2 hours of having fun looks like, and it's not this, right? Like, what's the equivalent in this movie of like the opening sequence of Deadpool, where he beats up TVA agents with the adamantium skeleton of Wolverine, like to NSYNC music, right? Like, that movie had a whole bunch of stuff in it. Like, I had some criticisms of some of the fight scenes in Deadpool, and I think a few of them are a bit phoned in. But on balance, Deadpool has a lot of fun and creativity with its set pieces. And there's a couple of moments where you go, oh, they went there, or oh, that's cool, or oh, I didn't see that coming, right? Something like that. And there was nothing like this in this movie. So if somebody enjoyed this movie, good for you, right? I wish I had too. It's just this whole thing of, well, this is a turn your brain off, have fun movie. It's just a wild ride with wild action and whatever. It's not that much. Like, there's not, like, I like kind of the river fight scene a little bit, where he kind of jumps into like 4 different animals over the course of a minute. That was okay. Like the symbiote horse was kind of amusing, right? After that, there's not much. Everything else is kind of muddy CGI vomit.
You didn't like the dance sequence between him and his neighbor? Well,
if there had been some kind of payoff for why, like what them reuniting means, then sure. It's just the fact that Venom is dancing to ABBA. Like, that's not enough to make me smile. Like, I've been a grumpy old man since the age of 25. It takes more than ABBA to make me smile. Okay. So, like, that was a scene that wasn't designed to be look how weird and silly this is. Like, I understand that these two characters got along in the other movies, right? Or in the first one, I think. I don't remember if she appears in the second one. But in any case, it's not a payoff to something that came before, I don't think. It's just a callback. And to some silly, like the juxtaposition of Venom dancing to ABBA's music. Like, that's fine, but it's not enough to make a movie enjoyable. You know what I mean?
And it kind of like breaks the story, because like he's terrified of this like symbiote hunter like finding him, because if he turns into Venom, they're gonna like he's gonna find the code.
And so he turns into Venom so he can dance.
Yeah.
What? Right?
And put everyone at risk. And then at the end of the movie wants to
including Mrs. Chen or whatever her name is.
Yeah. To then at the end of the movie want to be lethal protector and like save everyone. And it's just like it just doesn't correlate. And it didn't even make sense for where the character was at like 10 or 20 minutes ago in the movie, where he was just like timid and like not really popping out of sort of Venom and like checking over his shoulder and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden he wants to like be in his full form and dance with Miss Chang, and it was just like, okay,
yeah,
right, cool.
And that's just one way in which that doesn't work, right? But like when I walked into this movie, I was totally on board with the whole, okay, story is going to be whatever, but let's do some crazy stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Because I vaguely remember, and maybe this is just my memory, right? But I remember stuff in the first and second movie where there's at least a couple of set pieces that are genuinely unhinged, or somebody put some effort into that. Right. And so I was expecting that, like, if this is your fine, like, I was kind of expecting them to do an Aquaman 2, where they say, okay, this is the last one, and whatever we do after this, like, nobody cares anymore what we do because it's the last one. So we're just going to do whatever. Right. Like, Aquaman 2 ends with completely changing the status quo of the DCU, and nobody cares because people have changed the channel like 2 movies ago. Right. And this is kind of similar, where they could just do anything. Right. And they could really go all out. Like, it doesn't have to be that, but they could do anything with Venom, right? Like, give us crazy set pieces, give us like the most over-the-top fight choreography, whatever, right? Like, we really make use of his whole symbiote abilities, whatever, like anything, pick anything, right? And if it had been 2 hours of that, and it's just complete symbiote craziness because nobody cares because it's the Sonyverse, I would have been up for that, right? And I didn't get that. Is my thing. And so this whole argument of, but it's a fun action romp. It's not. I don't think so. Like, I wasn't impressed. Like there's maybe 2 scenes where I kind of enjoyed myself, where I said, okay, this is okay. And outside of that, it was just a slog.
I love how we're in the third movie of the Venom movies, and they feel like the big opening would be Venom beating up some just like local gang, or I can't remember what they were like getting dogs.
They had a dog fighting ring.
They had like a dog fighting ring, and it's like, okay, like we're in the third
Riveting.
movie, like Venom like beating up on regular humans isn't fun anymore, and like seeing him bite off their heads, okay, it's kind of like lost its novelty. Like, we're meant to be getting bigger than this. You're meant to kind of like enter us into the third movie with something that's like exciting and gets us off our seat, because you've done the simple stuff, you've done the sort of the groundwork, and you can go crazy with it, and they just didn't, pretty much.
So I'm totally on board if something is not highbrow. I'm totally on board with it not being high art, but at least make it fun. And I don't think we've been spoiled by Deadpool. Deadpool just did it right for once, right? I don't know why anybody like. But here's the other side of that. Like, I really don't like sounding elitist, right? But I was watching this movie in a room full of normies, and it was aggravating because they laughed at every joke, like every line of Marvel humor, like the most obvious that telegraphed from a mile away, they just ate up, right? And I don't even remember what the examples were because it was so generic, but like it really landed with people. And this movie has made, like, we're only the first weekend in, but it's made $175 million. That's something like 1.4 times the budget. I said earlier it was 200 million, it's actually 120 million. This might make a profit, and it might get another one. Like, maybe not with Tom Hardy, but it might get another one. And I don't know, like again, if somebody enjoyed this, fine, good for you. I didn't. But I also think this movie can be so much better. And I think if we rewards like half-assed attempts like this, we're never going to get anything better.
No, I agree. Well, I mean, worst case scenario, we get more Sony-verse movies or Sony Spider-Verse movies, which
I think the first Venom, I think the first Venom, like, the secret to that was that people were just up for some hyper-violent comedy stuff, right? Like not doesn't take itself too seriously, just a whole bunch of violence, just a whole bunch of quipping, and it's fine. And I think that is really what elevated, like what catapulted the first movie into success like this. And it seems like that's what they should have delivered on in this one. Create the big finale for that. And if you did that, I think like the trilogy would stand in a much better place. Like, it would stand on its own as, like, this is like if you just want some unhinged action with Venom beating up fools, like, this is it.
I'm actually really surprised that the audience liked this. Was even on some Rotten Tomatoes, the audience liked this by 8%, but like the actual reviewers, it was 38. So it's like it just is astonishing that there's is like,
and that's pretty normal for like action adventure comedy stuff, right? Like, where critics, much like us, complain about lack of themes and lack of character arcs and whatever, and the audience says, but I liked it when things exploded, and that's fine, right? Like I'm not talking down to anybody about that. I'm just saying things didn't explode good enough in this one. Make it explode gooder. That's my demand.
I think it's time for last thoughts and rating.
This was very unremarkable for the finale of a trilogy of what's meant to be an iconic character. Exactly how I expected it to go. I didn't have high hopes going into this, and it kind of probably even fell below my expectations going into this. So for that reason, I will give this a 3 out of 10. Maybe even lower, but 3 out of 10. They can take it.
For me, I wasn't surprised about what I got. First 2 acts, underwhelming. Final act, really good. So I'm going to give this. There's really not much to say about this one. It's just, it is what it is. I'm actually going to give this one a 5.5 out of 10. I do think it was slightly above average in comparison to the other movies that we've seen. So this definitely, like I said, this definitely wasn't a Borderlands. What I'm saying, it was just, it was, like I said, it was just a Sony film, and I think their past projects have just been average. So I'd say it has has to. I think this is it's definitely better than the previous projects that they've released so far. I think like Madam Web and Morbius. But yeah, give this one a 5.5 out of 10.
Morbius had themes and ideas.
Oh yeah, I remember watching Morbius in the cinema. I didn't think it was bad, but it was disappointing. I was expecting way more than what I saw. So, and I think Venom, personally, I would have. That's a conversation for another day, actually.
So I'm tired and I want to go to bed. So I'm giving it a thumbs down out of 5. That's my review.
Yeah.
Guys, are you sure, Daniel, you're gonna end it like that?
I regret nothing.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning into this week's episode. They?
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Let us know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Is this the worst comic book trilogy of all time? Or did you enjoy some of what you've got from these Venom movies? Let us know your thoughts down below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
All right, guys. We will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.